This is Off Planet Radio.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Off Planet Radio. I'm Randy Maugans. Anyway, today I do have a guest, and I'm very pleased and happy to bring back to the platform from down under somebody who's not a stranger to this show, James Bartley, the Cosmic Switchboard. James, welcome to the show.
Hey Randy, pleased to be here and pleased to be back.
Pleased to have you back, man. It's good to have you on. First off, let's get the preliminaries out of the way. Let's tell people where and when they can find you.
CosmicSwitchboard.com. You can also find me on YouTube, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. And you can also see my podcast on Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute. You just got to do a name search for me, and it should pull up the platforms. The reason we've set up alternate platforms is because of the censorship issues with YouTube. So we'll whack on things on the Rumble and Odyssey that we otherwise wouldn't be able.
That's something I need to do. I've sort of relied on the platforms that are established and not looked at. I've got a Rumble account, but I haven't actively been posting. Anyway, what I'd like to do first, because it's been a while since you've been on, and obviously audiences shift and change. Can you give us a little bit of a background on how you came into this whole milieu of the my labs and UFOs and things like that, your own personal background, just for people that may not be aware?
Sure, Randy. I've had ET experiences since childhood, and interspersed with that, beginning in childhood also, was this seeming interest in me by elements of the deep black military and medical communities. So not only would I be having ET experiences, missing time, nosebleeds, what have you, but occasionally, at least in the old days, especially when I was young, I'd be taken to a number of military medical facilities for treatments. I had a problematic childhood as far as my health was concerned, and this allowed these deep black controllers, if you will, the opportunity to kind of plug me into their system. So, my parents being, dutiful, doting parents, my dad was in the Navy, so when their dependents, so-called, become ill, the children are invariably taken to military hospitals. The only times I didn't go to military hospitals was in emergency situations, or when I was really sick and they just rushed me off to the local civilian hospital. But my scheduled appointments typically were with medical military facilities, some of which turned out later to be notorious mind control centers: Naval Medical Center, Balboa Park, San Diego, Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in Oakland, California, the Presidio Army Letterman General Hospital there in the Presidio in San Francisco. So, I've been taken to those places, and I've had missing time there. And then over the years, I began having these cyclical ET events, culminating in 1990 when I'd come back from Germany on a language study program, and I had a series of close range UFO sightings. I had a gray ET looking out at me through my TV screen. And on another occasion, I woke up to find myself confronted by 3 reptilian grays in my bedroom. And then they took me up into their ship, and things just kind of unraveled from there. and it was as a means to cope with the anxiety, the trepidation, and the curiosity that I really delved into the research. I'd always been interested in the subject because of the multiple UFO sightings I've had in my life and multiple psychic phenomena I've experienced. I was always open to this kind of thing. Never dreamed at a conscious level how deeply I was involved in it until I had a chance to do a life inventory of all the anomalous events in my life. And then, with the benefit of researching, networking with people, Eve Lorgan, who you had on the show, is a dear friend and colleague of mine. Barbara Bartholic, my late great mentor, was the premier, in my view, alien abduction researcher focusing on reptilian experiences. So I became a UFO researcher in my own right, circa 89, 90, as a means to cope with these experiences, moved to the San Diego area, uh, early 90s, and I joined the San Diego UFO Society, began attending monthly lectures, began giving lectures on my own, networking with other investigators, did a lot of work. I did a lot of field work in the high desert of Southern California, where there was a lot of reptilian military activity. And then, whether it was, what came first, the chicken or the egg, while I was deeply immersed in these reptilian investigations in the high desert of Southern California, Victorville, Apple Valley, Barstow, those kinds of places, I then started having military experiences again, being abducted by the military, either individually or in groups, trained, subjected to different types of psychological behavior conditioning, let's say. And it was only when I had a time to zoom out and reflect on what had been going on that uh, it wasn't a case of the military suddenly became interested in me because I was investigating reptilians and military abductions. I realized that it was connected to my boyhood experiences of being taken to these military medical facilities. On one occasion, as a boy, I woke up in a medical clinic with a bunch of wires stuck in my head. And
Boy,
other times, I had a lot of missing time at Oak Knoll, especially. I don't even remember going there most of the time. So that, in a nutshell, is who I am and why I got involved in this. It was initially a means to uh, regain some equilibrium because of the anxiety and trepidation I felt. That, here's nightfall coming. I'm gonna have to go to sleep, and I'm scared of getting abducted again, right? So it was really a means of grounding myself. But in the process, I made some wonderful friendships and relationships with alien abductees, my labs, colleagues like yourself, and all over the world who otherwise would not have gotten to know. So, there's two sides to this. It was some would see it somewhat as a curse, and some would see it as something of a blessing.
I'm beginning to wonder, and I want to bounce this off of you, given your background, that my experience personally is that I know I was part of a program. I know that I was abducted. I had multiple ET experiences as a child, as a teenager, and even as an adult, and memories of being used in operations. Now, this wasn't so much my labs as it was um, some sub-project, which I've not been able to quite figure out in terms of what exactly it was. But one of the things in delving into this, both in terms of research, in terms of going through my own fragmented, recovered memories, and I only trust my memories to the point where they really are fragmented because I think there's slices that are taken out of our time frames when we go through this. The missing time is part of time manipulation. So, having said all of that, one of the things that I uncovered with myself was that we were pre-selected, pre-life, that we were basically born into situations. My father was in the Navy as well, and I was basically born in a military hospital. So I have some memories of being in hospitals as a kid. Again, like you, I have multiple problems. Our bodies are fragmented and kind of weaponized against us to keep us off balance. Is it your concept as well that we were pre-life sort of selected?
Would say so. I think from an oversoul perspective, some of us have, to be sure, fragmentary memories, fleeting glimpses, if you will, of past parallel incarnations, and not just in our linear incarnational timeline here on Earth, but when some of us were in a past parallel incarnation, what we would now refer to as aliens. Because I don't believe our souls originated here on planet Earth. I believe that some of us willingly came here to be caught up in this reincarnational cycle, to be boots on the ground at this point. And we'll delve into this in the second segment, but there's no doubt in my mind that these stories and recollections that people have of the Orion Wars, which has been played out in
Yeah.
cinema, we've seen facets of this in the Star Wars saga, etc. There's no doubt in my mind that we were from that whole conflict probably multiple times. And
Yes.
then for whatever reason, we
Yes.
decided to incarnate here. And the powers that be, both ends of the spectrum from a positive and negative standpoint, seem to know about us in our prior incarnations and seem to be aware of when we were going to re enter into this earthly plane of existence. When I was about 4 years old, I had a fully conscious daylight encounter with a little ET in my bedroom in Corpus Christi, Texas, and it was telling me the same thing it tells a lot of other people. You have a special destiny to fulfill. You're going to do important things in the future. I would just being a territorial kid. What are you doing here in my bedroom? Or I missed all my toys, right? That was my attitude. And then later on, because there's always an element of some of these ETs trying to activate your ego and get you to veer off in some weird
Yeah.
tangent. I never took all that seriously because if I was as special as they say I am, then why are they telling countless other people they're special too? Well, to a degree, we're all special. That much I would agree to. But looking back with the benefit of hindsight, when that ET was telling me that when I was a 4-year-old boy, I was able to zoom out and say, yes, I can see how that could play out because from an oversoul perspective, I would want to be here at this moment rather than gallivanting around in some advanced spaceship or playing a harp in some higher spiritual dimension. This is where people like you and I, soul entities, as Ed Casey would have said, we could have made the most difference, right? So we have to make do with the tools and the skills and the state of being, state of awareness we're at any one time, and make the best of it. As the British say, just crack on with it, right? So
Yeah.
there's no doubt in my mind that when we realized we were coming back at an oversoul level, and when these forces of positivity and negativity, because I do believe we're part of an extended ET family, some of us, boots on the ground, if you will.
Exactly.
It's almost,
Exactly.
yeah, and it's almost like, and we've talked about this before, it bears repeating, when we're somewhat in that bardo state that people talk about in between lives, and we're presented with these options. Okay, here's family A, family B, family C that you can incarnate into. They all have their pluses and minuses. Not all of them are going to be perfect. Some of them are going to incur a lot more abuse and trauma than others. But sometimes one has to make the best of these opportunities, however imperfect they may be. So we choose to incarnate into a certain family tree, and there's a lot of challenges we have to endure, but it's a marathon, and here we are. So, and I think things are ramping up. Randy, the UFO activity all around the world, which they're now dismissing as mere drone activity.
Right.
Once again, we're at that point where the ET activity is spiking through the roof.
Yep. My guides told me 2 years ago that we were going to begin to enter this period. I have it recorded. I haven't released it. I keep talking about doing this. I hadn't released it, but it was February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2023. when they told us that their ships would become very obvious in the skies. And my only regret is that I didn't release that at the time because I'm still having trouble trusting my own intuition sometimes. But this was a very direct message. And I think the message was for me anyway, to give me some discernment about what was about to occur. Yeah, I mean, they blew it off as drones. They talked about New Jersey and New York, but they never talked about the fact that these were appearing all over the world at Offutt Air Force Base. They shut down right Patterson and Dayton,
All places.
of all places. Yeah, yeah. A little clues here, little hints. So can we agree that we're kind of in a war between factions of ETs?
I would say so, and I've been saying for some time that we're going to once again start seeing open conflict in the skies, in the atmosphere between warring, competing factions. And again, this is an extension of these Orion wars, which will probably have gone on for millions of years. If one were to take a look at our solar system, it's a battleground. According to Bode's law, there should be a very large planet where the asteroid belt is, but there isn't. There's just an asteroid belt. And then you have the exploded planet hypothesis, the astronomer, the Naval
You walked
Observatory.
right into my next question. Thank you.
Yes. No, 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 please, we'll go on. But where's it with Thomas Van Flandern? I can't remember exactly the name of uh, the astronomer who actually bought an 8-inch telescope, went down to New Zealand to view this massive celestial body coming up from the southern skies. He saw it, came back to North America, and within weeks died of a fast acting cancer. Right. So this issue we have, this ongoing issue of this second sun, mini sun, the brown dwarf, Nemesis, Nibiru, call it what one will. I'm satisfied it's in this solar system now. And maybe it ties into all the dreams I've had throughout my life of alien invasions, of huge fleets of ships coming out of the sky, of gigantic spherical ships hovering at low altitude, of huge rectangular ships coming straight down out of the sky and setting the denizens of the planet into a frenzy. I've had dreams like that recurring for decades. And perhaps what we're seeing now is the opening manifestations of that.
You know, it's funny because I did a regression a few years ago, and one of my memories that came back was of being on a destroyed planet, along with what was my higher self soulmate at the time. And that dream has haunted me in ways I can't even tell you. It was so visceral. It wasn't actually a dream, it was a revelation of this destroyed planet. So let's go into a little bit about that. In your understanding, what was the planet that was taken out?
Known by various names, and I could be wrong about this. Have referred to it as Maldek. Some people call it Tiamat.
Tiamat.
Um, Yeah, and I've actually spoken to people who recall evacuating that planet in a past. I call it past parallel incarnations because all time is now. They're just the eternal now and variations of it. But they remember leaving the planet and watching it get destroyed from a distance. And if people find that hard to believe, uh, people should take note of what Dr. John Brandenburg talks about. He's found evidence that satisfies him and satisfies me that the surface of Mars was subjected to mega thermonuclear airburst and on at least two areas over the Martian surface. And this residual evidence for that in the form of certain isotopes, which can only come about as a result of fissioning on a mass scale. He's found the evidence for this. So, if taken at face value, that means that at least two planets in our solar system, Earth and Mars, have been plagued by these alien intrusion invader issues. And then you add in the third planet, that's blown up, where there should be a planet, but we have the remnants of it, this asteroid belt, which is going to cause recurring problems because they come up with all these stories, and maybe there's some validity to it about the Oort cloud and what have you. But I think that some of these asteroids that are flying around and come by on a cyclical basis, they're the remnants of this very large destroyed planet. And then the second sun system has its own trailing huge debris field of asteroids and rock and what have you. And we may be getting subjected to more and more meteorites and more bolides. So I think that there's a real ongoing conflict with factions. And let's take the nuclear issue. If we go back to the dawn of the so-called contactee era, and I think that's a point in time that really needs to be reevaluated by so-called serious researchers. Many people, just like you and I, were invited on board by these beings that appeared perfectly human, took people on
Hmm.
board,
Hmm.
showed them around, flew them around, even took them off world. And oftentimes, the parting message when they return these individuals, these so-called contactees, is you've got to tell the leaders of your government, and this happened not just on in the United States, but elsewhere around the world. You've got to tell your leaders they've got to stop nuclear developments. It's not only irreparably harming your planet, but even though some of us reside in different dimensions and planes of existence, your nuclear testing is impacting our worlds, right? Apparently, they told Eisenhower, gave Eisenhower the same message in one of his early meetings with ETs. Give up your nuclear weapons development programs, and we'll be willing to share our know-how and our technology with you, right? But here we are. So there seems to be one group of at least one faction, probably an umbrella of a number of different ET groups that may or may not work in consonance with one another, that wants to shut down this nuclear capability and potential for thermonuclear holocaust. And we've seen evidence of this with the shutting down of ballistic missiles, these fated giant scenarios that have happened to our Minutemen missiles in places like Malmstrom, Malmstrom, Montana, and other places. We've seen evidence, and this is borne out in documentation pried out through the Freedom of Information Act, that UFOs have visited nuclear missile facilities, and they've gone to places like Hanford, Washington, where they develop plutonium. They've gone over Oak Ridge and Los Alamos. So one faction or factions of ETs are definitely against this nuclear weapons development program, but also there seems to be this other faction represented, in my view, by at least one or more groups of reptilians and their hybridized minions here on Earth, the reptilian hybrid plantation managers, as I call them, that are hell bent on nuclear war. I mean, think about it, Randy. Since when have these leftists popped up like Sean Penn and what have you, and demand nuclear war with Russia? That used to be a major issue back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, the no nukes movement. Remember that?
Right,
Well, gee,
right.
where are they now? Where's Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Jackson Brown now? Singing the song of
Exactly.
anti-nukes. It's
Yeah,
like
they went woke.
they went woke, right? They used to hate the CIA. The CIA, and they're right, is the cause of so much of the issues and problems the world over. But now, when you bring up wait a minute, it was the CIA and NGOs that did the coup in Ukraine in 2014. They don't want to hear that. If anything, you'll just get an emotional reaction out of them. So now it's like they don't even have problems with the CIA anymore, right? The same CIA that was trafficking drugs from Central and South America and all that they raised the furor about back in the day, rightly
They're
so.
still trafficking drugs.
They're still tracking drugs. That's a whole nother issue. That's why the whole war on the cartels is a non-starter, and
Right,
that'll
right.
just veer us off in a whole nother direction. But I want to keep it on the whole alien issue. So there's a faction that doesn't want nuclear war because not only will it affect our planet, but affect their worlds, even in other dimensions, because quantum entanglement being what it is, we're all connected at some level. But then there's this other faction that seems to want it, that does is doing everything to provoke Putin poking him in the eye constantly, all these issues and all these incidents they keep pushing over and over. All they're trying to open a whole another front of warfare. So I think there's a faction that wants nuclear war, backed by a certain ET faction, reptilian faction, and other factions that don't want it to happen. Right. So, and I think as a result of that, and probably other issues I'm not aware of, there's going to be ongoing conflict. And that's why I've been reading in the recent past, Randy. I've been revisiting books like Alien Identities by Richard Thompson. He was the Vedic scholar, and he
Right.
was
Yeah.
showing his interpretation of the Vedic text. It's not even an interpretation, he's taken at face value. These aliens have been warring amongst themselves since time immemorial. If you read and take at face value the descriptions of the weapon systems that come out of the Vedic texts, weather weaponry, what we would call beam weapons, etc., etc. So
DEWs.
that's been going on all along, and I think we're going to start to see that again.
Well, I think we saw it in Hawaii and I think we saw it in LA. I don't think there's any other way to explain the anomaly of those fires. What a simple brush fire. And then there was apparently this video on X, formerly Twitter, showing some car that was set on fire and rolled down a bank that was um, allegedly the um, inflection point of these fires. I mean, it's absurd how far they go in lengths to gaslight us.
Yes. And then they'll say, "Well, we caught this arsonist and caught that arsonist," and they make a big deal about it. But how satellite imagery showed that these three major fires started simultaneously, and they just erupted. So there was some kind of directed energy aspect to it as well. So, and I've always said that although it may appear, if one had a looking glass to see these things, it's apparent humans tweaking the knobs and pressing the buttons. I would argue that the archontic non-human intelligence is working through those people, through those agencies and institutions, are ultimately responsible. And what we're talking about is a non-human intelligence behind this, because in every possible arena, Randy, whether it's processed foods, the aerosols in our environment, the contaminated soils, it's an all-out assault on not just human beings, but on all the flora and fauna on this planet. So whatever is behind that, by definition, cannot be human, because who would want to do this to themselves? It doesn't make sense that these power mad bankers want to, I'm not going to use the real term, but that term from The Sopranos, defecate in their own kitchen or their own dinner table.
Right, right.
Who's gonna want to do that unless these defecators, if you will, are non-human to begin with? And that was William Bramley's thesis. That's another book I've revisited in the recent past, The Gods of Eden. He was a skeptic about ETs and extraterrestrials, and then when he delved into it, he found out, crikey, just behind the scenes, there's been this non-human intelligence that was guiding, manipulating, orchestrating all of the conflict and strife on our planet. And now we're seeing it in spades.
It brings me to a place where I have to speculate a little bit. If they're this powerful, if their presence is ubiquitous, that they've been with us for probably thousands of years, what is the war over when we could have rolled over long ago? Why is it so difficult to subjugate humanity? I know that's a kind of open-ended question, but
I
if they
think that
could
there's,
have done it, if they could have done it, why didn't they do it?
yes, why didn't they go to the old paradigm, which may have been visited upon this planet in the distant past, of the old alien invasion scenario? I do believe one follows not just necessarily only Graham Hancock's work, but the work of others who are satisfied that there was once a so-called golden era on our planet where there were quite advanced globe-spanning and even spacefaring civilizations. In shorthand, people refer to it as Atlantis, Lemuria, etc. And I believe that there was a time when the gods, if you will, ETs, various stripes, walk the earth, mingled, commingled with humans, right? And we see this in the iconography and the relief sculptures of these human, comparatively midget-sized humans serving their Anunnaki god masters who tend to be giants depicted in this artwork,
Mhm.
right? So there was definitely a time, it seems, when these gods walked amongst men. So
Interesting.
it's interesting that they would create so much strife and so much turmoil here. But I think that what they've done is they decided, well, on this occasion, instead of just the old alien invasion scenario, which I'm sure they've done again and again throughout the cosmos, we'll just let the world population expand. We'll create all these rival ideologies and religions, and we'll control it through a financial system and what have you. And then here we are today. So I mean, you look at all the people walking around today, those who have survived the ordeal and the treatments rolled out in the recent past. I mean, they're walking around with what amounts to an alien operating system inside of them. So this concept of transhumanism, we're there. And those who survive, because there's been a mass culling, as you know, these last few years. Those who survive that process, it seems that they want to make the survivors uh, plug them into some kind of a hive-like Borg mind scenario.
In that sense, hmm, it strikes me that maybe they succeeded. I go with the NPC hypothesis that says that the majority of people walking around on the planet may not have fully developed consciousness and essentially become non-player characters, background characters, figures to fill in the vistas, while those of us who are, this sounds so callous. I don't want to be callous towards people at all, but those of us who have, let's just say, gone through the hell of it all seem to have a more highly developed sense of conscience and consciousness.
I would agree, and we say that not with a sense of elitism,
No,
far from it, because of all the abuse we've suffered from the so-called elites. The last thing we want to do is have this massive inflated ego and try to lord it over others. We're just speaking from a basis of wisdom, which is knowledge based on experience, right? So whereas it may be theoretical for some to delve into these issues of mind control, behavior modification, alien human joint programs, uh, there are some of us who've lived it. I just came across this. I don't know if it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime, one of those channels. It was called Third Eye Spies. Now, apparently, this docu series had been around since 2018, but I just noticed it, right? And the first couple of episodes delves with Operation Stargate, Stanford Research Institute, the remote viewing program, etc. I'm sure you're familiar with. And then
yep,
they began talking about Pat Price and what was left unsaid. And to be sure, I've only seen you know one full episode and part of another one. What they're leaving out of the equation as regards Pat Price was he remotely viewed these underground bases, Mount Hayes in Alaska, and at least two others, where there was a joint alien human program in the works
yeah,
that was happening in real time. Now, the work he did, just psychic spying for his controllers, speaks for itself. The the attention to detail, his ability to draw based on what he was remotely seeing in Soviet uh, secure military facilities. He'd be drawing cranes, he'd be drawing all this equipment, which was verified with satellite overhead imagery, right? So we know, and going back to the lore of that time, he was regarded by people in that program as being the best of the best, Pat Price.
preeminent, yeah, preeminent remote
So
viewer.
So what happens? He suddenly gets pricked with some kind of pointed object, either entering or leaving a hotel casino in Las Vegas, and within a short time dies a horrific, painful, agonizing death. Well, what's being left out of the equation in these documentaries is he was remotely viewing alien human bases, right? And that was something that, especially at that time, in the early mid 1970s, they were not going to allow to come out. And we've heard fragmentary stories since then of, we have the Dulce story from the escaped Rand security specialist Thomas Costello. I'm satisfied Costello was a real person. He was eventually tracked down, presumably murdered, because the people he was in contact with lost contact with him. But Thomas Costello talked about a similar program in Dulce, where there was a joint military
Hmm.
alien operation going on underground, run by the Department of Energy. And then we have the Phil Schneider story of, him inadvertently boring into uh, a cavern system in Archuleta Mesa, which is a stone's throw from Dulce, really, as the crow flies. What does he run into? This underground alien lair, right? And he was suicided. So there are powers that be that, despite all the smoke and mirrors we have about disclosure and congressional inquiries, and notice how the congressional inquiries about UFOs, UAPs now, has been kicked to the curb because the mainstream narrative is drones, right?
Right,
So
right.
one moment we're having all these so-called whistleblowers talking about what they know from these projects. Next thing you know, all that is just relegated to the the dustbin of history because of the ascendancy of these drones, so-called, which is, it just shows you just how simple-minded the media is. The NPC factor you just talking about, where the simple parroting and repetitive nature of the drone reportage has caused even surface level truthers once again to just parrot and mimic the whole drone narrative. Here we go again, back to square one, really.
Back to square one, yeah. There, it strikes me that what we're looking at now is heightened activity on both sides. We'll call them positives and negatives. The negatives have worked through the human agency, whereas the positives likewise have worked through the human agency and what we would probably call light workers or people who came in, fully engaged. In other words, full-on control players. And that's why the hell we go through. Um, when you describe the trauma of your life, which I feel it, it's palpable to me that so many of the people that I've talked to over the years, the people that you've talked to over the years, and again, you know, forget about the pride of being so-called special. Being special was actually what Project Talent was all about, which was what agency was my nexus into whatever project it was that I was a part of. Because I was tested heavily in school. But now it feels like there's a ramping up of light. We're going through a series of planetary alignments right now that are very key, that only happen in cycles of thousands of years. And we're starting to go through a period where I believe there's an elevation of human consciousness, even across the map, even to some degree, the head nodders kind of have to at least look at this, which is all they can do. They can't respond from a genuine place of articulation on this. But what is your sense in terms of the ascendancy of consciousness and possibly some aid in getting us through this period right now from the positive faction?
Well, we look at the opposite of that. There seems to have been some muses or some kind of input from from somewhere to the weapons designers of this world, the missile designers, the designers of weapons of mass destruction, Yes, I'm going to give them credit. They did all their homework and did all the physics and the math and all that. But somehow, somewhere, they're getting these brilliant ideas. And just look at where we're at now, nanotechnology, et cetera. So if you look at that as a model, and then you go parallel to that, there does seem to be this interest in people who are boots on the ground at various levels. The people on the boots that are boots on the ground could run the gamut from people like us that are aware of the cosmic warfare aspect of this, to people that, you know, believe in limited government, just want to be left alone, want to and have their little plot and grow their own vegetables and crops and raise their families the way they want to. Really, in the overall scheme of things, they don't need to have all this quote unquote extraneous detail and stuff that you and I delve into uh, in order for them to make positive
Hmm.
changes in this world. So we're seeing that all points in between. There definitely is a greater awareness. I look at recent efforts at scaring the populace again about this, that, or the other impending pandemic once again. When they're foolish enough to leave the comment section intact and activated, all these people just chime in and just say this is a joke, a scamdemic, a fake, a fraud, and to the point where they have to shut the comments off, right? So nowadays, there's a lot of people that are not bashful, especially after what we've collectively endured the last few years. We have been under a state of siege. I would argue that continuously since at least 9/11. Want to get technical, you get back to Oklahoma City, that we've just been under this onslaught of imposed trauma, fear, what have you, to get us in that kind of vibratory state because the powers that be, non-human and these deep arcane uh, sects that practice black magic and know about physics and reality in an entirely different way than most people, they knew that there was this mass consciousness taking effect. And that's why they've hammered some of our MyLab project people, brethren, so hard. I've spoken to, this is not a small sample size now. I've spoken to a number of women in particular who have gone through hell in this incarnation through programs, SRI, cult abuse, targeted individuals, a string of narcissistic controlling people in their life. And then when you delve into their past incarnations, well, they were stoned to death in this life as being an herbalist. They were burned at the stake in that life as being a witch, right? So it's not only that they're hammering us at times in our current incarnation, but the powers that be who are familiar with our soul entity, they've hammered us in past incarnations. So we come here into this earthly plane once again, carrying all this trauma and all this baggage and the convenient, from their standpoint, mind swipe. So we have to try to process all this stuff at a subconscious
Yeah.
level, right?
Yep.
Without actually being able to figure out what happened at a conscious level. All that effort to keep us, sever us, if you rather, from our connection to divine source. But I think the fundamental concepts are changing in physics, in what mainstream scientists call the fabric of reality, and it's evolving us. And I'll tell you a quick story. I'd like your take on it. Oh, about 10, 15 years ago, by now, I had this very, very vivid dream, which I wouldn't say I kind of had when I woke up and I pondered it, I had a new age slant on it. But, when I zoom out and I look back in hindsight, maybe I did. And long and the short of it was I had a series of dreams involving the Lakota elders. And also, in one of these dreams, I was in this medical lab and there was some kind of conflict going on. I was hiding behind a counter in this medical lab, and there was some well known Hollywood actor next to me, right? And what he did was he grabbed a long piece of selenite and he put it into his mouth and it disappeared in his mouth. It was like he was ingesting it, but not chewing it or swallowing it. It was just disappearing in his mouth. And then at that point, I saw this image of this um, technician or scientist in a lab coat, And then I was able to see through him in a like he became translucent, or uh, his outer body became invisible, and I was able to see his skeleton structure. And then his skeleton structure changed into like some kind of crystalline structure. And so when I woke up the next morning, I almost had a new agey kind of response. Oh, well, it means that we're evolving and perhaps ascending to a more crystalline. No, with the benefit of the hindsight, that whole spectacle was showing us that, oh no, you're going into a silica phase,
Yeah,
silica
yeah,
nanotech phase. And with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that was the message that the Lakota elders were trying to impart upon me. Not that we're going to become some highfalutin crystallized being, but that the powers that be were going to infect us and turn us into like essentially an extension of the silica Internet of Things kind of project, right? So, and point of relevance to what you talked about, they have to do everything they can to stop us from reconnecting with divine source, even to the point of infecting so many people with nanotech and silica, what have graphene, what have you. It just, to me, that just shows how powerful the innate power we have as divine spiritual beings. If they have to go to that extent to change us from the inside out, it's going to be
yeah,
unsuccessful. There's some of us that's going to break out of this paradigm. There's no doubt in my mind that we have a worldwide awakening, but we also see a separation, water and oil kind of thing going on too, where those people that are affected with the NPC madness, they're going in the opposite direction, uh, a fast track in the opposite direction. Think of all the out of control Karens that we're seeing all over society nowadays. That's just one example.
yep. It's interesting to watch the division, the bifurcation of the human psyche right now. This whole woker revolution was really a way to re-embrace some ideologies that kept us locked up in fear. Fear of offending people now, microaggressions, the soy boy circuit with the transgender agenda, the transgender, and to keep us powerless as well within the parameters that are acceptable. I think what I understand about all this is there's an acceptable parameter of control, and it's very, very delicate at any given time, given that we, the ones who have taken the hits on all this, are probably 2 to 3% of the population. But we're the pivot.
It's Fulcrum point. I would agree with that. And we say that not in an elitist sense,
No,
because we're just zooming out here and looking at, the potentialities.
well, that's why we do what we do. We largely put it out there into the field. And the field, that's a whole other subject. I call it the construct when I'm writing about it. And the construct basically is a feedback loop of energy that is negatively charged, that keeps us in this tenuous state of constant alert, alarm, fear. And ultimately, the root in all of this is fear. How much fear can they pump into the system? And at what point does a being push back? It's almost like a hamster in a microwave oven. How much can you take before you explode? We want to get it to the point where it's cooked but not exploded. That's a crude kind of analogy, but um, the more I look at this, I'm like convinced that we really are the atlases in terms of carrying the world on our shoulders in a lot of ways and bringing people up to speed on this, even if we're considered to be the lunatic fringe of the internet.
I would agree. but somebody has to carry the ball. And you know, what I like to see, and maybe we can delve into it a little more in the second segment, is I would like to see younger people, carry
Yeah.
the torch. Right. I just gave a lecture in the recent past, and once again, and I'm not unhappy about this, but it was just an observation. Once again, most of the audience were older people. There was like one or two people that were in their 30s or younger. Right. I would love to see more and more younger people show up at these events, delve into these subjects, because we really need someone to carry the torch after us.
Well, I'm glad you segued that for me. We'll go into the second half, and before we do that, you wanna talk a little bit about St. Petersburg and the conference that's coming up in July.
So it's happening in mid-July, July 14th to 18th, if memory serves, St. Petersburg, Florida, the Full Disclosure Now conference. There's quite a number of well-known speakers that will be giving presentations, and I'm going to be giving a presentation there as well. So you can go to my website and you'll see information about that, thecosmicswitchboard.com, or you can go to Full Disclosure Now. They have their own dedicated website, and you can see the lineup of speakers. So I'm really looking forward to that. So those of you in striking distance, right? Yeah, definitely make an effort to come to St. Petersburg, because it's going to be a blast.
I think you'll see some younger people there too.
Oh, I
I
hope so.
I I'm like you. I invite the next generation to step up. I know some of you out there are one of us. We'll just put it that way.
Yes.
That's going to wrap for this segment. If you're seeing this on the public channels, um, we're going to segue over into a second segment for our subscribers, and that'll be shared as well on your platform, James. Um, offplanetradio.com is my website, and the subscription shows are patreon.com/Randy Maugans. And your website is, again, James?
CosmicSwitchboard.com.
There you go. We'll see you on the other side if you're just closing out this show. Remember, the truth is inside you.
This is Off Planet Radio.